Okay, guys, while I'm waiting for something else to render, I came across this article and some very cool things that I'm excited about and some sad news. I don't know if it's any sadder than what we've been used to, but some sad news. I'm not going to read this part of the article. We're just going to get into it. So Warren Spector's recently done an interview with, I guess, GamesBeat about the new IP he's working on with Otherside Entertainment. And we're just going to jump into that interview. So let's just go for it. Here we go. So this is an edited transcript of the interview of GamesBeat with Warren Spector. Can you fill in some of the blanks on how things have been going for you in the last few years with Otherside? It seemed like work on System Shock 3 came to an end for you. I don't know if that's the right way to characterize it. Warren. We released a statement last year. There's not much more to say at this point. Tencent is taking the franchise forward. It'll be up to them to say what they want to say. There's not much clarification I can give you. How long had you worked on it previously? We worked on it in 2018 and 2019. That was it. How large had the studio gotten for the project? I think we maxed out at 17. Was there a period of recovering from that then? I think you had to downsize. Yes, we did. There was certainly a period of personal recovery. I'm not sure how to say it. I take it personally, you know? Game development is not just a job to me. It took me a while to get my creative juices flowing again, and then COVID hit. The world got crazy. So, just this portion of the interview. Otherside Entertainment released their statement, I guess last year. I don't even remember when that was. Could have been 2 years ago at this point. It's been insane. Saying that, yeah, Tencent, and again, I'm sure that someone in marketing or someone in legal is like, just keep regurgitating this statement, taking the franchise forward. It's very unclear. The community manager, Alyssa, I think for the forums, the Otherside forums that I talked about in another one of my videos, she said like, oh, like it's still sort of a collaborative thing. Somebody who worked at Otherside on the RPG Codex said that Tencent is doing the majority of the legwork, but that they still might be kicking around conceptual stuff at Otherside. We're going to get into some other parts of the interview here that maybe that's not necessarily the case. But from these statements, it seems very clear that, like, Otherside, you know, people who are working at Otherside, Paul Neurath, Warren Spector, anyone who was previously working on the game, is no longer really involved with System Shock. Here's the weird thing, okay? Here's the weird thing. If we go to Otherside Entertainment's website, first of all, they haven't updated since, I guess, December 15th of this year, or of 2021, sorry. Within a year from, they still list System Shock 3 as their game, okay? And again, who owns the IP for System Shock? Excuse me. Who owns the IP for System Shock? Well, that would be Night Dive Studios. They own the entire System Shock IP, okay? They I don't know for sure, but it stands to reason that they licensed the System Shock IP back over to Otherside to let them make System Shock 3. Funding fell out through, I think, 2 different publishers for System Shock 3, and they had to shut the project down, essentially, for a period of time, or at least that's what happened. Then, all of a sudden, they released that press release about Tencent and System Shock. This one, which was, let's see, hold on. May 20th, 2020. So we're going on 2 years since this, right? We are happy to announce that Tencent will be taking the System Shock franchise forward. As a smaller new studio, it had been challenging us for carrying the project on our own. We believe Tencent's deep capabilities and expertise as a leading game company will bring the franchise to new heights. So I think this statement's getting a little more clear now. If we go to the forums here, is it going to let me? Anyways, I think their forums have been shut down. So the forums won't load. But I seem to remember them saying something. So System Shock is still listed as theirs. I would imagine that they are still the ones who hold the licensing rights. And maybe they were trying to work out a deal with Tencent to publish. And then Tencent said, okay, if you want us to be involved with this, we're going to have to do it. Like I said, there was somebody who claimed to work for Otherside, who got onto the I think RPG Codex forums, who was talking about what was going on behind the scenes. He said basically they needed to take it to square one, but he said Otherside was probably still involved, and it's weird that they still have System Shock 3 on their website if they're not involved. And I speculated that potentially they would be coming up with things like story, they would be doing things like casting, and they would be coming up with the or testing systems in the game. Like, we want to test this new weapon that shoots, I don't know, balls that turn people into tribbles from Star Trek. We're going to test that here. We're going to test, like some zero-G sections or sections with, like, pockets of, like, microgravity or even, warped space-time or whatever. We're going to test that here, and then we're going to send it off to Tencent, and they're going to... So I thought that they were still kind of doing some development and still had some input. The way that Warren Spector's talking is like they just not doing anything at all with System Shock 3. So that's very upsetting. I also think it's strange that after the Tencent announcement, it's probably been in development for 2 years if Tencent's doing anything with it right now. And they said they're taking the franchise forward too, which is kind of disconcerting because, again, if Night Dive owns the IP, then why are they taking maybe just this section of the franchise? You think, I don't know what kind of contract basis or whatever would have, transpired here, but you kind of think to yourself like, well, wouldn't Night Dive just pull the project then and say like, well, maybe we'll find somebody else to work on it or something? But I don't know what the hell is going. It's still unclear, but I think what is becoming more clear, and maybe it's just denial right now for me, why it's still unclear for me, but I think, well, it's also unclear because it's like, why are you still listing it on your website? Right? Why are you listing it on your website? Why are you, like I said, in the forum, I mean, I think that's why the forums aren't loading, because possibly things were said by that community manager that were maybe not accurate or misleading, but the forums don't seem to be working anymore. So I don't know, maybe they just haven't updated their website, because what's the point, Except they updated it as of December 15th. And it's like, do you not see that the first thing that pops up on your website is System Shock 3? But anyways, back to the interview. It seems that it is all but verified that Otherside really has nothing to do with System Shock 3 anymore. Warren Spector certainly doesn't. Paul Neurath and certainly doesn't. The only thing that could be there that is still part of Otherside is gameplay concepts that they had initially put forth, game mechanics that they had initially put forth, art direction, story, and casting. Those are the things that may still be there from Otherside, but it sounds like nothing else is happening in terms of Otherside with System Shock 3. Anyways, moving on. So he kind of moves on into some generalities. Okay, what seems good about the environment right now? We seem to be in a day when veteran game developers can get access to capital again and start new things now. Spector, we certainly can get meetings. There's a lot of money floating around right now. You've noticed it. Lots of other analysts have noticed it. There's certainly opportunities, and I can't wait to talk more about this. How did you start this revival, being able to do a new game or another game? Spector, it's what Paul and I love to do. Individually and together, we've created a lot of franchises that have had long lives. People still talk about Underworld. They still talk about System Shock. It blows my mind that 22 years later, after we shipped Deus Ex, people are still talking about and playing it. For all the mixed responses to the Epic Mickey games from gamers that I don't think they got it, but a more mainstream audience did. Years later, I still get fan letters or fan emails now. People who tell me they've played the game 10 times. The response to Epic Mickey was incredible. I would get fan letters and email from people who said the game helped them get through chemotherapy. I once got a letter from someone who said that his daughter is autistic and doesn't engage with the world, but she engaged with the game, and he insisted that he tell me how important the game was to her. There was a kid in a wheelchair who showed up at a trade show and asked if he could use the game as part of his physical therapy. I got an email from his dad later saying that his doctor said it would be great for him. People are still talking about the game. That's what Paul and I have done, and that's what we want to do again. I've seen a bunch of other interviews with Warren Spector. You can tell he's been basically obsessed with early cartoons, or just cartoons in general, his whole life. I think his master's thesis was about cartoon animation. He's been obsessed with early Walt Disney stuff. This was clearly like his dream project, his passion project come to life. And he's not joking. This is another thing he's said in interviews all the time. He's the luckiest. He's one of the luckiest people in the game industry. He's probably one of the luckiest people in terms of career ever. And it's true. How many times has this dude been handed his passion project? Underworld was sort of a like realization of something that he had been like fantasizing about. Now he was more a producer on that game and a manager rather than like actually working on it. He basically just helped the team meet their goals and get the money that they needed from Origin at the time. Then he worked on Deus Ex. Again, John Romero just like, here's all the money that you could ever want. Just make your dream game. Then he gets contracted by Disney. You want to make a game about Mickey Mouse? And he's like, yeah. So it's kind of crazy. I do agree. It's like, it's insane how many times he's gotten the opportunity to make something that's just purely his dream. But yeah, so you can tell that was really a passion and dream project for him. And I think he maybe took it a bit personally that there was a lot of backlash. I actually played most of the game. I was going to do a video on it. I still might. I lost most of my footage in a boating accident. Not really. My drive just took a crap on me. I could possibly fix the drive, but that's going to require replacing the drive heads. And it's almost easier. I'm not paying. There's not enough data. It's important enough on that drive to take it to a data recovery center. I could do the head replacement myself, but there's a decent chance I'll screw it up. But I've done delicate work like that before, so maybe I'll do. I don't know. But it might be easier to just replay it, I think. So I may do it for the channel, but we'll see. Anyways, continuing. Like I said, it's not just a way to pay my mortgage. It's a career. I've always thought that games were important. I remember back at Origin, I used to look around and I'd see what Richard Gary and Chris Roberts were doing, Paul and Doug Church, and the team working on Underworld and System Shock. I think we were going to change the world. We didn't do that personally. I disagree. But video games have changed the world. We won. There's still plenty more to explore. It's not hard to keep going. Did you have despairing? Did you have despairing moments where you thought maybe it might be better to disband the studio? At what point did you turn from that kind of thinking to doing something again? Spector, I never thought that it would be good to disband any team. It happens in this business, maybe more frequently than one would hope, but no, I had a good team. We ran into some circumstances. Tencent is now taking the franchise forward. Man, if that isn't legalese, if some lawyer or PR person did not tell them to say that, I don't know what's going on. It's like that, if you've ever seen that supercut of all the local news, that some members of the media. It's good for everybody, honestly. Can you say whether what you're doing now is original, a brand new game for you, or anything like that? Oh yeah, it's all original. I started thinking about it around the time COVID hit. Picture me sitting alone in a room with my empty hard drive, coming up with cool stuff. It sounds like a dream, but it's not. I have a lot of ideas. I always tell people ideas are easy. I legitimately have hundreds of game concepts, from one sentence to a 20-page form, on my hard drive. I went through a bunch of ideas and developed them to the point where I said, nah, this isn't the one. But ultimately, I hit the one that's the one. It's all original. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. My wife described it yesterday as my magnum opus. We'll see. I don't know about that, but I have a great leads team in place. I don't know what a leads team is. Maybe that's a industry jargon. Everybody says that, and you don't have to believe me, but this is one of the best teams I've ever worked with. How long have you been actively working on it now? I went through a pretty long phase of just developing this one or that one. I guess it's been not quite a year, but again, remember, that was me sitting alone. It almost doesn't count. Excuse me. Paul and I take this seriously. When it comes to creating something new, you want to do something special. Making games is, I call it grindingly hard. If you're not at least trying to do something great, you're going to fail most of the time. And I get that. But if you're not trying, it's soul crushing. There's no point. I'm a relentless advocate for a particular kind of game, for immersive simulations. I'm going to do that for the rest of my life, or at least the rest of my career. If I can't do that, I guess I'll stop making games. This is you can tell also Warren Spector, I'm not going to say he's like socially awkward, because he's very sociable, but he seems like a person that's a little more content to be sociable like one-on-one, and maybe doesn't really relish being in the public eye all the time. And you can tell he just rehearses stuff. He's like, I can't tell you how many articles have... This article, by the way, I think came out like within 20 hours. He's said this multiple times. If I can't make immersive sims, I'll stop making games. I've seen that headline floating around for years. So, like I said, he seems like a guy who always, he's a revolver, right? He's got all of his cylinders filled with particular sound bites, and he just fires them off when he needs to, you know? But he's always got something in the chamber ready to go, you know? But in many ways, it's what I've been thinking about for quite a while as the next step in immersive sims. If we pull it off, people are not going to be ready for what's going to hit them. I certainly hope so. That sounds awesome. If Warren Spector's saying stuff like that, and again, he said some stuff like this as marketing, you know, sort of BS for Underworld Ascendant. He said, oh, there's things that happen in that game that you've never seen before. And, you know, I've played the game and I wouldn't necessarily agree, right? The only thing that was good about it was basically importing the magic system from Ultima and then Ultima Underworld into a modern game, which many games haven't done. And I absolutely loved the magic system in that. But and some of the things that you could do with the magic system were great, but it's not like they had never been done before. Just maybe in that context, they hadn't been done before. So it could just be typical marketing BS to hype people up for his game. But he seems pretty passionate and certain about this. And I was just thinking earlier, too, as much as it's awesome to see old IPs revived, like Underworld or System Shock, the problem with older IPs is there's the weight of expectation. And one of the guys who was a dev, one of the main devs who was on the RPG Codex, or allegedly one of the main devs who was talking on the RPG Codex, he was saying, like, yeah, we were doing like all this cool, like, experimental, like, immersive sim stuff and, you know, all these, like, interesting gameplay systems and mechanics. He's like, but the overall game was definitely not what people would have been expecting. And he's like, it's probably good that they didn't ship what they were working on. And the problem is because there was the weight of expectation on that game. Maybe those systems would have just been so cool, maybe not mind-blowing, but it's just really fun to play with, but it would have ultimately been bittersweet because it's like, well, okay, but this is a really much smaller scope of a game than people were expecting System Shock 3 to be. So it kind of, you know, there's a lot of disappointment. So that's the nice thing about fresh IPs. Apparently what Otherside's working on now are 2 totally fresh new IPs. Because we've heard about the other one. He's going to mention in a minute. I've heard about the other one. They've kind of been talking about it. I think they've been talking about it since Underworld came out, or a little bit after. But now they're talking about what I'm going to call Krusty Whale. But yeah, I mean, this is really cool. And we'll get to some other things that have me very hopeful. But then again, I've been hopeful for Otherside since the beginning. They announced System Shock 3, they took it to E3, they took it to trade shows, they showed off a gameplay trailer, and then they had all this great Kickstarter footage for Underworld Ascendant to show off like these crazy awesome gameplay features and proof of concepts, and then same thing. And the issue has always been the publisher backs out. They are left with no funding, they can't finish the project, and in the case of Underworld, they shipped something that was significantly less than what people were hoping for, and that's a big problem. So, you know, this enthusiasm and zeal and optimism has been shown before by the company, so it doesn't really mean anything, but we'll see. Okay. Is it consistent with some of the themes you've advocated for before, like emergent gameplay over scripted storytelling? Spector. Oh, absolutely. I have no interest at my studios. At my studios, you're not allowed to say the word puzzle. We don't make puzzles. As soon as you say those words, the player must or the player has to, I stop listening. It turns into blah, blah, blah. Games have always been about players showing how clever and creative they are. We remind ourselves constantly that they're as smart as we are, and in many ways smarter. The bottom line is, we're the only medium in human history that's been able to engage players as partners in storytelling. That's what I'm going to do as long as people will keep paying me to do it. And here, of course, is the Krusty Whale. So far, the art direction here looks fucking cool. It seems like some sort of fantasy thing. It could be a dream thing, you know, some of the things that he's alluding to later. I don't know. I don't really care. I mean, not necessarily. I do care. I do care a lot. But I mean, I don't really care what it is or isn't. I'm excited. The image that you showed off of this whale dressed up, is that meant to be from the game, or is that more an image of the studio? That's an image that represents an aspect of what the game is about. It's going to be a pretty deep game. There's going to be a lot of variety in what you can do and what we ask you to do. The whale is part of that smorgasbord of game levels. It looks like underwater gameplay is going to be part of this. Spector, you could assume that if you wanted to. I can neither confirm nor deny. As far as the mix between Concord and Austin, is that where you're living, between you and Paul? Spector, right. Paul lives in the Northeast in New England, and I live in Texas. Neither one of us is willing to move. Paul tried really hard to get me to move up to Cambridge, and I couldn't. You'd have to blast me out of this town with tons of TNT. If there's a silver lining to COVID, and you have to look hard to find that, is that we've learned that we can make games with remote teams. We're one company. There's a Dungeons & Dragons game being done up there with Wizards of the Coast. Okay, so they've confirmed that the new IP is going to be based in D&D. They have, I guess, the consent and licensing from Wizards of the Coast. They may even be liaisoning with them. That's what they're doing. That's what Neurath and his team are doing at Otherside East, I guess we'll call it. And, yeah, okay, so there's some interesting information there. They're learning an awful lot and filling up a hard drive with engine and extensions to the engine. We're learning right now along with them. We're not starting with an empty hard drive. It's pretty cool. The great thing about remote work, it used to be that I had to build the best team I could that lives in my hometown. Now I can just build the best team. The level of talent on my game team right now is astonishing. I don't know if you're familiar with Warren Spector. He's a leadership expert. He's written a bunch of books, one of which is called Organizing Genius. I love it. I make everybody on my... Excuse me. Who's talking to me? I make everybody on my team read it. I'm not editing that out. You can just deal with it. It's about creating what he calls a great group. He talks about the Lockheed Skunk Works, Disney when they were working on Sleeping Beauty, and Xerox PARC. Why those places, why those teams were able to do such amazing things. Most people aren't lucky enough to work with a great group, ever. I've been lucky enough to do it a few times. This is shaping up to be another one. I continue to be the luckiest guy in game development. Yeah, so he said that a lot. And I actually tend to agree with him. You know, I can thinking like I can only imagine working at Looking Glass Studios, and it's like, oh, we could work on Ultima, Underworld, or System Shock, or this new game Thief coming up, and they're like, no, you're working on British Open Championship golf. You know, you get hired by that studio, and you see all the cool projects, and you're like, I have to work on a fucking golf game. Are you fucking kidding me? Or I have to port something over to the N64, some racing game or something. Come on, man. You know, but Warren's been, you know, I think that's game development for a lot of people. You know, my friend, he had a cousin who worked for EA for a while, and now he's a bigwig. Now he gets to do what he wants because he just slaved away there for decades, and he was miserable. Now he gets to work on cool stuff. But when he started, he was like, yeah, I wanted to make shooters and RPGs and all this cool stuff, and I just made sports games all day. And he fucking hated it. So Warren, I think, is one of the luckiest guys in game development because he's always working on stuff that absolutely fascinates him. Interviewer, I don't think you mentioned how you're financing this one. Did you get any investment that makes it possible? Spector, I probably shouldn't talk about that. But you don't sound like you're worried about money right now. No, Spector, no, I'm not worried about money right now. So far that's good, but again, we've heard that before. That's been the biggest issue for both Looking Glass and Otherside now, is that money has always been an issue. He says he's not worried about money right now, but honestly, don't forget, Spector was also the guy that said when Starbreeze pulled out a System Shock 3, he's like, if we have to self-publish, we can do it. We have plenty of money. We can totally do it. I don't like publishing, but we can totally do it. And now they're not working on it, presumably because of financial constraints. So I don't like hearing this over and over again, year after year. Like, no, I'm not worried about money. We're good. And then projects don't come out, or projects come half-baked. Given that there is a very different environment out. Given that there is this very different environment out there, do you have any counsel for people who are considering raising money? Is this the best time to raise money for games? Spector, every time is the best of times and worst of times. That's where we are right now. The best part of it is there's a lot of activity, both on the publishing side and the M&A side. Everywhere there can be activity, there is activity. The cool thing about where we are right now, anybody who has an idea can get an engine to make it. There's so many ways to reach an audience and so many business models. Nobody knows what they're doing. It's kind of the Wild West, but that means there's opportunity. That also means there are thousands of people making games. The fight for attention, not just at the player level, but at the publisher level, the funding level, there's a lot of competition. You need a way to stand out. Luckily, Paul and I have reputations enough that it opens doors. But for a lot of people, that's just not going to be possible. I'm not sure how I could counsel them. GameSpeed. We saw Gabe Newell's comment on the metaverse and NFTs now, calling them a lot of insanity. I don't know if you see those things the same way or if you have some different perspective. Spectre. Here's where I'm going to get in trouble. I'm literally going to have people giving me hell about what I'm about to say, but I don't really care. NFTs are ridiculous. I do not understand why anybody would want to climb on the bandwagon. Ownership of virtual goods that can be instantly reproduced in unlimited quantities? Who thinks that's a good idea? So NFTs, I have no interest. The metaverse, sure, maybe someday. But honestly, it's going to be long after I'm gone. I'm happy about that. I like living in the real world. I don't particularly find putting on a headset and interacting virtually with other people. No, not knowing if my wife is coming up behind me with a baseball bat, that just doesn't appeal to me. And it's not like you can look at the current social media landscape and say, hey, that's great. I haven't been on social media in 2 years, almost 3 years now. I just gave it up. I was tired of people giving me grief, tired of the time it was taking up, and it didn't add anything to my life. I always told people when I was doing it, it's like playing Dungeons and Dragons, where the number of followers you have is your level. If you have a lot of followers, you're a winner, or you're powerful in some way. I just want to make games. GameSpeed. It's always interesting to see who's driving and who's diving in and who's not. There's that contrast between tradition and innovation, I guess, or tradition and the latest new scam. I wouldn't say scam. Prediction is a fool's game. It might be that the metaverse is the future, that VR is the future, although VR does come along every 10 years to save whatever medium needs saving. I'm a little dubious. Maybe this time it'll happen. There's still some challenges ahead. If you look at how much money Meta has put into that and how little they've gotten out, somebody's rolling some pretty big dice there. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. I just think we're a ways... Oh, God. I just think we're a ways from that being a thing. AR is a little more interesting to me, but even that, just let me make my games. I don't even think of that as a traditionalist. I think there's still so much innovation ahead of us in flat screen games. We haven't explored everything the medium can and should do. What I'm doing right now, my team is... God, dude, maybe it's tunnel vision. It is late, and I'm kind of exhausted, so maybe that's it, but man... and I am getting tunnel vision right now. What I'm doing right now, my team is terrified, as they should be. That's a good thing. If you're not scared, you're not working hard enough. There's a quote from Salvador Dali. I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something like, if you know how to paint your painting beforehand, why bother painting it? That's where I am, at least. I can't speak for other developers, but I want to do things that no one else has ever seen. We're doing some of that in this new game, that's for sure. We'll see if we can pull it off. There are two ways to go in life, in games, in anything. Either you rule the world or you fail gloriously. I'm okay either way. And I'm just going to see how much... Oh my god, dude. This is going on forever. But I think we're just going to trudge ahead and keep going. Okay. As far as team size is concerned, you've made games with relatively small teams. I'm sure Epic Mickey must have been the biggest one. Spectre. I had more than 200 people in my studio. If you look at the credits on Epic Mickey 2, I'm not making this up. There are almost 800 names there. I had more producers on that title than I had people on the team for some projects. We had 17 partners around the world working on this thing. The results were great, but you get so far away from the game at that point. There were people at the studio who didn't know they worked for me. There were plenty of people whose names I didn't know. That's terrible. One reason why Paul and I did this Otherside thing is because we've both done that, and we think there's a better model. At least it's better for us. We're building a relatively small internal team, 25 or 30 people, where you can keep the culture alive. You can know everyone's name, communication, used to be as easy as swiveling your chair and talking to someone. Not anymore, of course. But having a 25 to 30 person team, conceptualizing a game, doing prototyping, and then partnering with external folks, not just make us a chair, but actually having partners the way we did on the second Mickey game, we think that's a better way. The work comes back from our partners, and the small internal team reviews, critiques, requests changes, and ultimately, when the work is right, the right level of quality, saying the right things to players, then we integrate it internally. That just seems like a more humane, doable model than putting hundreds of people on a project. But again, there are so many ways to make games now. Nobody knows what's right and wrong. We'll do what we want to do. So another thing that I got right was I postulated or speculated that the Underworld Ascendant team was probably less than 20 people. And he said that his System Shock 2 or System Shock 3 team only got as high as 17. So I think that was another issue with why it was so hard to push development so fast in that last year of development, which was basically, for all intents and purposes, the only year of development on Underworld Ascendant. And I think why the scope of System Shock 3 was was probably going to be disappointing, because it wasn't going to be on the scale of something like System Shock 1 or 2, given some of the complexities involved in modern game making and the fact that you just need lots of man hours to do some stuff. Although it sounds like they've come up with a better system where they test stuff and conceptualize internally and then send the legwork off to large production studios or whatever and then get it back. But yeah, so it sounds like Otherside is a really, really small company of probably less than 50 people, certainly less than 100. How often do you find yourself in a position where you have to throw out a bunch of stuff to restart? Constantly. And then what happens? How do you convey that to the team? Spector. That's a tough one. You encounter people all the time in game development, everywhere in life, I'm sure, who don't want to throw things away. There's an expression in, I think it was William Goldman, the screenwriter, who said, kill your darlings. That's important advice. If you get so attached to something and go so far down the road with it before you realize it doesn't work, you're in a world of trouble. What you do, you fail fast. Okay. These are cliches, but there's a reason things become cliches. There's at least an element of truth. Early on, I always tell my teams that we'll throw a lot of stuff away. We might go 2 or 3 levels deep versioning and prototyping something, and then we'll decide that it isn't crucial to the game, or the game evolves in a way such that something you thought would work in the context of the game is no longer relevant. You constantly have to throw stuff away. It comes down to communication. First of all, it's not just me saying no. I describe myself as, I like to kick things off and let people better than me do their jobs. They come up with stuff better than I can all the time. But I have one more vote than everybody else on the team combined. If I have to, I can say, no, we're not doing this, or yes, we're doing this. But if I use the extra vote, it means I've failed as a communicator. As long as you're communicating constantly, which gets back to smaller team stuff, the team knows when something's working or not. If they go down the wrong path, like the art style is wrong or whatever, it just means that I haven't done my job and nudged them back. The other thing I talk about all the time with my teams is that my job is to create what I call the creative box. Those are the constraints within which you're going to work. But as long as you stay within those constraints, do what you want. I will never tell you to make a pixel blue instead of green. I've seen team leads do that. I will never do that. And I'll be there with you every day talking about what you're doing. If I see you going outside that creative box, my job is to nudge you back in, not slap you and say, idiot. You say, no, this is not the direction we talked about going. That's worked pretty well. The team usually knows when you need to junk something. Games beat. And I guess the team can persuade you a different path is better. Spector. I'm tempted to name all of my team members to you so you don't assume that I make these games alone, but I have designers on this team who are so much better as designers than I am. I think I'm pretty good as a conceptual designer, an idea guy. I can contribute to systems design discussion. I'm pretty good at that. I'm really good at being an editor, you might say. Those are my strengths, but the designers on the team and on past teams, they're so much better than me. That's what you want. Anybody who's afraid to hire people better than them is going to fail. They're constantly persuading. Half the time they don't have to persuade. Half the time it's just, oh yeah, of course that's better. On Deus Ex, I conceived a skill system that was very different, very simple. I thought it was really elegant, and Harvey Smith came to me and said, this is bad. We'd started working on it. He said, this is bad. How about if we do this instead? And it was one of those, oh yeah, that's better moments. Harvey's a better designer than I am. Now working with a guy named Rick Ernst and another guy named Michael Mazza, who are just better than me. They're constantly course correcting me, but it's always within the confines of that creative box. It's kind of goofy, but one thing I do when I'm starting a project, when we're wrapping up the concept phase, I'll close my eyes and imagine what the game is going to be at the end of the day. And in every case, it turns out not to be the game I expected. Every case. because team members bring their own perspectives and their own ideas. But the key is that you have to be able to say, every detail changed to make this exactly the game I wanted it to be. That's true of Deus Ex. It was true of the Epic Mickey games. Chase Jones, a guy I worked with on those games, better designer than me. Working on the Underworld and System Shock, Doug Church is a better designer than me. It's always tough reading interviews too, because you have to like sort of it's not normal writing. There's a cadence of speech from interviews. It's tough to kind of like, you're like, oh, what? How is he talking? I always find people better than me, and I always try to credit them. Journalists don't want to talk about teams. They want shorthand. Not you, but a lot of them would just say created by. I will not have the words created by if I have anything to do with it. This is the most intensely team sport I've ever experienced. I've been on movie sets, I've worked on tabletop games, nothing compares to this. What we do, it's grindingly hard, like I said before. You'd better surround yourself with better people. GameSpeed, do you have any encouragement you'd offer to younger people in the industry? I'm starting to feel like this is really drifting. I'm going to finish it, I may edit it out. Spector, what I'd like to say to younger developers, well, a couple of things. One is, if I can talk you out of doing this, or anyone can talk you out of making games, you had no chance of success anyways. Be committed, because this is so hard. I don't know how the hell I've survived as long as I have. I love it. I think it's important. I think we're potentially the medium of the 21st century. I'm committed to it. Find other people. Don't try to be a loner. Find other people who buy into what you buy into. Like I said earlier, I describe myself as a relentless advocate for immersive simulations and emergent gameplay, allowing players to express their creativity through play and answering questions. That's the other thing. Games ask questions. Other media answer them. Letting players answer the questions through play and then argue with each other, I love that. I absolutely love that. So don't be dissuaded. Make sure you're committed. You have to love this. I tell them, don't ignore the humanities. If you interview with me and say, I'm going to overstate and I'm going to overstate this to make my point. But if you say, all I do is play games, you have no chance of getting a job. I need people who bring varied viewpoints, who love movies and read books and paint, make music, who have well-rounded lives. Communication is critically important. If you can't express yourself in writing and in speech, you're doomed. It's a team sport. The other thing, when I talked about finding other people that believe what you believe, someone involved in a project has to have a strong vision. The word vision is thrown around maybe too much, but it's maybe the most important word. You have to be able to rally people around something specific. You have to give them a target. You can't hit a target without a target to hit. Everybody needs to be on the same page. I've worked on some projects, which I will not name, where team members wanted to make a different kind of game. Why don't we just make a side scroller? Why don't we just make a puzzle game? Why don't we just make a straight shooter? You have to say no. That's not what we're about. If you want to do that, you need to go find some other place to work. And I've lost good people over that, because I'm going to make, I wish I had a better term for it, but I'm going to make immersive sims, and that's it. The content will change, the visual style will change, the tone will change, but the underlying philosophy will be constant. Again, if any of you guys thought that immersive sims were not a gameplay philosophy, content change, visual style, tone will change. Yeah, it's a philosophy. It can be many different genres, maybe not in terms of mechanistic genres, like he said, like not like side scrollers or whatever, but thematic genres or certain gameplay style genres. Yes, it's a design philosophy, and this is from the man himself. I mean, you could still debate that. I'm just saying some pretty strong evidence. I like to talk, okay? So I talk a lot about this internally and externally. I also have a mission statement. I wrote it up, wow, a long time ago now. It's changed almost not at all, which is maybe a reflection on the fact that I'm too hidebound. Who knows? But people have to read that mission statement and buy into it. They have to buy into the two-word summary of it, which is play style matters. How each player plays should affect the outcome, and no two players should have the same experience by the end of the game. Unique experience is what games are about. I also have these inspirational poster things. It's so obnoxious. I post them all around my office, except I don't have an office to post them in anymore, but I'll send them to you. The mission statement and the posters, you can ignore them or rip them up or publish them forever. But the other thing I tell young developers, I'll stop after this, is that it's their job to destroy me. It's their job to make the world forget that I ever existed. If they're not doing that, they're just repeating the past. Why are you wasting my time? Why are you wasting players' time? Why are you wasting your own time? Destroy me. Do it nicely and respectfully, but destroy me. GameSpeed. This kind of goes into something, if people are kind of wondering why, like, I do like arcane games, but you know, and I like indie immersive sims, but I'm not like so down on them. It's because when Looking Glass Studios and some of these other teams made their original kind of sims, they were, you know, breaking the mold. They were doing something that no one had done before, and they really carved out a name for themselves in the industry. Warren Spector especially with Deus Ex. But games since then haven't evolved. When people want to make a game that reminds them of Deus Ex, they basically just copy-paste the mechanics of Deus Ex and just do like a new story with new characters. And as cool as that is and as fun as those games are, in terms of like pushing the state of the art forward, I think it's really important to be like, okay, what other systems can we put into a game? How can we change the mechanical design? How can we change narrative design? How can we change interactivity to push the design principles and the philosophy forward? And as of right now, especially with Arcane, I don't think they have. I think they're basically just updating a lot of the stuff Looking Glass did. The closest I'd say they've gotten is kind of the depth of the mechanics for interactivity and maybe some of the combat mechanics from Dishonored 2 or Dishonored. Those kind of really pushing the boundary, but they haven't really like. It's almost like if you guys are familiar with molecular orbital theory or quantization of energy for atoms, you know, you don't move to the next, like it's not a constant gradient up. If you add energy to an electron, it doesn't just keep increasing in distance from the nucleus. There are quantized energy levels, which means if you don't make enough of a milestone investment of energy, it's not going to be promoted to the higher molecular orbital. Right? It's just not going to happen. That's where the quantum mechanics come from, is that energy and different aspects of the subatomic or atomic universe are quantized and not sort of continuous. And so it's kind of like that, where it's like I feel like Arcane has put more energy in, but not that sort of threshold energy to reach the next stage. They're more of like a continuous, just kind of gradual increase on the progress that was made by Looking Glass. And you could totally argue, because I don't have the answers, like, well, okay, well, how would you change it? And it's like, I don't know. I don't have the answers. One thing that I do think, though, is I think in terms of like that sort of pure immersive sim design philosophy, a lot of the stuff that I saw in VR with Half-Life Alyx was kind of what we're talking about. In terms of like, what's the next level of what's the next stage in the state of the art of immersive sims? And it's like, I don't know if I'd call that game an immersive sim, but a lot of like just being alone in a room, being able to manipulate all the objects and like look at them and pick up glasses with water in them and write on the walls and stuff. And okay, that in and of itself may be really cool, but not necessarily groundbreaking for a whole game. But if you can build an entire game around the depth of those mechanics, that's cool. I don't necessarily think Alyx did that, but it's a step on the road. And I don't even necessarily think that VR has to be that way, but VR is at least a vehicle for us to start doing things like that. So, but yeah, so just sort of clarify my opinion on some of this stuff. Game speed. Is it intimidating to be indie now in light of how much M&A goes on in the industry? How do you soldier on when things like Microsoft buying Activision, Blizzard are happening? Spectre, it's pretty crazy right now. Mostly I try to focus on making my game. I have an obligation to myself to do what I love, and I think it's important. I have an obligation to my team to guide them to the accomplishment of our vision. I try hard not to think about other things. If it happens for Otherside, it happens. There's enough crazy activity, who knows? It might happen. If it doesn't, we're a good, solid business right now. We're making games we believe in. The D&D game is going well. You have to ask... the D&D game is going well. You'd have to ask them to know for sure, but I think Wizards is happy with what we're doing. Right now, the way to deal with it is to keep your head down and make a game. Make the best game you can. Gamesbeat. Any other topics you'd like to cover today? Spectre. I always urge people to make sure the team gets some love. This is not me making games alone. I need to keep getting that word out. Rick Ernst, Michael Massa, Joe McGinnis, Kip Carbone, Michael Fitch. I could go on. The teams make the games. I haven't done real work in probably 30 years. You don't want me building a level anymore. You don't want me planning out a series of missions on a branching tree. Well, we don't want branching trees at all, but that's another story. It's all about the team. The people better than you, not one guy creating something out of whole cloth. Okay, so, I just wanted to go through that interview. It's got some really interesting stuff, and you could argue what's the point of this. I could read it myself, but at least for me to interject and talk about certain things, and you have the full context that I do. I am actually going to be doing a video. I'm not going to tell you when or even if on like what is an immersive sim, defining immersive sim, stuff like that. A little bit of the history. But that's less important than some of the other stuff I'm working on for the channel right now. But this has got some big stuff in it. I'm really excited. I mean, I wish there was less vagary in terms of what the hell is going on with his new IP. I'm very interested to know something. I'm also very interested, it's been quite a while since I assumed that Otherside Austin was working mostly on System Shock, and that Otherside Concord was working on the D&D project, because that's been talked about for quite a while. So I'm a little dismayed that we haven't heard anything about the D&D project, even though we had heard some stuff about System Shock. Now we're getting a little inkling of what this Crusty Whale is going to be. And that is going to be my reference for it until we actually get a name drop. But whatever this Crusty Whale game is, I would really like to get some idea of what's going on. It's so far, I'm excited, but I'm excited about basically buzzwords and marketing at this point. I don't know anything about it. But I think, honestly, Otherside should have published something at this point about the D&D project. But more importantly, I guess the statement by them was very clear, especially considering what Warren Spector has said in this interview. The Otherside is not really doing anything at all with System Shock 3 anymore. And like I said, if they have anything to do with the game, it's probably already been done. These are probably things that have already been finalized. There's no active work. There's obviously no active development, but there's no active contribution whatsoever from Otherside, and we just have to hope that if their contribution was good, that it is still being part of the game. But like I said, their website is a mess. It seems that they've shut down their forums. And don't quote me on that. This is just what it appears to be, because I remember trying to access them a few weeks ago, couldn't get on. Week after that, couldn't get on. Obviously today, in showing you this, couldn't get on. So I don't know. Maybe they're just gonna take down the whole website and launch a brand new one with, because it's Underworld Overlord, I don't think is probably making any money. Underworld Ascendant is not making them any money, and it's kind of a point of contention with fans. And then System Shock 3 apparently is no longer in development by them, so their website is not representative of anything going on in the company at all right now. So, actually, let me hold on. I think I just opened up thing on another page. Apparently they do have job offers, though. We're putting together a big job for the Forgotten Realms. So they're working on a Forgotten Realms thing. Art director or audio director. Okay, so these appear to be actual, winter 2022. So these appear to be legitimate job listings on the main website. So I got no idea what they've been terrible about communicating with the public, communicating with fans. All I can say is I'm very sad to hear that, because I had hoped, like I said, the guy at the RPG Codex who claimed to be part of the project said that he assumed that, or the last thing he heard was that at least in terms of executive game design, right, which is basically what Warren Spector does. Like he says, he's an editor, he's a manager, he can review people's work and say, he can kind of sign off on it or say no, take it back to the drawing board. I assumed at least even that kind of stuff was still being handled by Otherside, but it's very sad to hear that it doesn't sound like even that level of involvement is ongoing anymore. But, you know, we'll see what Tencent does. I don't really have any faith in them to make a good System Shock game. I think it's probably going to be some sort of by-the-numbers sci-fi shooter thing. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be good at all. And I'm very sad to hear that. I kind of wish that Night Dive would have just pulled the plug entirely and then just shopped it around to some other developers, or maybe just developed it internally down the road after they get System Shock Remake out. But I am excited to hear about their new D&D project. My guess would be that a lot of the systems that they played around with in those early Kickstarter backer videos for Underworld Ascendant may actually make their way into this D&D game, because it's a very similar universe, and it's obviously going to be some sort of sword and sorcery, possibly RPG type thing. So it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the aspects of the game that were supposed to be involved in Underworld Ascendant don't make it into the D&D game. And I'm very excited about Krusty Whale. So anyways, thanks for joining me, and some interesting news, some sad news on System Shock 3. I've pretty much lost all faith in that project now. I don't care about it anymore. I'm not excited for it to come out. I will obviously check it out when it comes out, if it ever comes out, but no, I don't really care anymore about it. But I am excited for whatever else they do, and I'm excited to see what Night Dive is doing with System Shock Remake. So thanks for checking this out.